Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau was an author, poet, journalist, and teacher who became known for his transcendental beliefs and his work as a dedicated abolitionist in the reform against slavery. He was born in Concord, Massachusetts on July 12, 1817, to parents John and Cynthia Dunbar Thoreau. John Thoreau worked as a small businessman and shopkeeper. Henry Thoreau, being the third child, had two older siblings, Helen the oldest, and John Jr. He also had a younger sister, Sophia. In 1818, the family moved from Concord to Chelmsford and Boston, where they moved for John Thoreau's work purposes. In 1823, the Thoreau family moved back to Concord, Massachusetts. It was here that John Thoreau began operating a pencil factory that eventually brought the family to financial stability. Growing up, Henry David Thoreau was sent to Concord Academy in 1828, where he impressed his teachers. After he graduated from the academy, he attended Harvard in 1833. He studied Greek, Latin, and German, as well as courses in mathematics and mental, natural, and intellectual philosophy. Partway through his education, Thoreau had to drop out of Harvard due to financial and health-related concerns, but he did go on to graduate in the middle ranks of his class from Harvard in 1837. After college, Thoreau and his brother opened up a grammar school, which unfortunately closed 3 years later due to John's illnesses. He then worked for his father and for Ralph Waldo Emerson, who Thoreau saw as a guide, father, and friend. He spent the following years of his life as a part of nature, following his transcendental views, and he wrote essays in his spare time. He published Walden, his main work, in 1854. He then wrote Civil Disobedience in May of 1849, which was fueled from a night he spent in jail after refusing to pay a poll tax. He spent the last few years of his life as less of a transcendentalist and more of an abolitionist in the fight against slavery. Unfortunately, Thoreau's health grew poorer as time went on, and he died of tuberculosis in 1862. Ralph Waldo Emerson taught Thoreau about the ideas and purpose of transcendentalism. The Transcendentalist movement was one of the greatest literary movements of the 19th century. It combined Romanticism with reform and focused on the individual. Transcendentalism also put a large focus on nature, which Thoreau had found solace in and enjoyed since he was a young boy. In order to be successful in a transcendental world, one must live above materialistic needs as much as possible and focus on the spiritual aspects of life. One of the fundamental principles of transcendentalism was the belief in the reliability of the human conscience, which was based upon the conviction of the human immanence of God in the soul of the individual. Most importantly, Thoreau was also an avid abolitionist. Abolitionism was a movement during the 1830s up until 1865, when the Civil War ended. It advocated for the abolishment of slavery. The movement focused on abolishing slavery completely in the United States and was mainly supported by Northerners. Many of the Northerners believed that slavery was a sin and a racial prejudice. However, many of the Southerners who had and used slaves strongly opposed these views in the abolitionist movement. The clashing of these views became increasingly important during the time period leading up to the Civil War. Eventually, this conflict would lead to the Civil War in 1861. Thoreau's literature was his main contribution to the Transcendental movement. With the help of Ralph Waldo Emerson, he wrote The Dial. The Dial was a magazine, led by Emerson, that supported the Transcendentalist writers as well as their ideas and consisted of many of Thoreau's poems and essays. One of Thoreau's first outdoor essays, Natural History of Massachusetts, was published in The Dial as a book review, and with this he proved his calling as a nature-styled author. The magazine discontinued publication in April of 1844. In 1945, Thoreau experimented with his view of transcendentalism by living in full simplicity and leisure, which inspired his novel Walden, consisting of 18 essays which describe the things he saw, smelt, touched, heard, and tasted on his journey to live self-sufficiently. Thoreau spent 2 years living at Walden Pond, but his novel only accounts for 1 year. The novel was written in first person as he stresses his beliefs on how society should live with simplicity and not luxuriously. The novel was eventually published in 1854.
After leaving Walden Pond in 1849, Thoreau wrote A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers that reflected a boating trip that he and his brother John took on 1839. Many of Thoreau's works consisted of personal experiences as well as his views for a simple way of life.
Henry David Thoreau was a key player in the fight against slavery. After he left Walden Pond, Thoreau's transcendentalist beliefs faded, and he turned his focus on being an abolitionist in his later life. John Brown, an abolitionist, mentored Thoreau, and Thoreau thought of him as an idol. Thoreau wrote many papers on the evils of slavery, including one of his most important, known as Slavery in Massachusetts. These papers were one of his contributions to the abolitionist movement. Also, Thoreau helped many slaves escape through a secret passage known as the Underground Railroad. One of Thoreau's most important contributions, however, was advocating for nonviolent resistance and protests in the fight for abolishing slavery. In one of his most famous works, Civil Disobedience, Thoreau justifies that it is okay to intentionally break unjust laws in order to better the government. Also known as resistance to government, civil disobedience showed the power of the role of the individual to determine what is right versus what is wrong, while disregarding what society says is right or wrong. These views paralleled to slavery in that even though society may approve of slavery, it was not necessarily just. Thus, like with his previous work, Slavery in Massachusetts, Thoreau used literature to rebel against the government and support the fight against slavery.
Henry David Thoreau's impact on society was immense because of his talent and achievements. As a result of his literature, such as Walden, the people of the 19th century were exposed to transcendental writing at its best. His focus on simplicity and balance between man and nature showed the people another way to live their lives as the country was industrializing. His literature, as a whole, affected the people because it made them think about and challenge their intentions.
In the movement against slavery, Thoreau helped slaves escape on the Underground Railroad, and he thus impacted the lives of those he helped on the road to freedom. In the long run of history, Thoreau's civil disobedience has motivated many notable figures in peaceful protest movements. The peaceful way of resisting politics and society motivated activists such as Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, and others. Henry David Thoreau showed a way to peacefully and intellectually rebel against the government. He also helped in the fight to free the slaves. Above all, he proved to be a transcendentalist and abolitionist whose literature and actions changed history.